All right, so why does restoration or building or in this particular case like resto mod or mechanical replacement, full mechanical restoration take years worth of time? I have a perfect example and I wanted to kind of like show this um, for a couple of reasons is one, like sometimes people get confused why for years I'll end up, you know, showcasing something on the interior, why I work on the interior. And the flat out answer for that is number one, it's just a question of budgeting. Number two, it's really a matter of doing an outdoor project where weather is a factor, like 90 plus degrees. The rain that we have here, something that if you have to do, and a lot of this work is with a respirator, and if you have to do that, it's just not possible in some conditions outside of just precipitation and so on. Like right now being winter, yeah, you can go outside and do a few things mechanically, but then there's a question of having parts. Like there's so much that you can do, but you can't just fix things out of nowhere. A lot of my interior is mostly based on labor. A lot of things are free wood. Obviously, the velvet is there, but the stuff like that is really cheap. It's arts and crafts. So here and there, but I've never taken a back seat to major parts or things that are actually needed for the truck to be mechanically rolling, safe, and sound. Um, but I don't know. I just wanted to kind of make a note on that because, and it's not any people in particular, but obviously when it comes up, uh, sometimes there's kind of like confusion. A lot like a common comment will be like, "Oh, we'll get it running first," and I'm like, "Well, you can't right now. Like, I just don't have the money to get to A to B for this or that." And that's like 90% of what happens, and people think that you're kind of not, you don't have your priorities in order. Um, and it's not to say that it didn't need it. Like I had to tear up the interior and had to look at least the flooring to patch that, the walls so I could insulate better, and so some of it, yes, it's a luxury. It's for fun. It's part of the whole project overall, but I've never put that the fact of what's needed into the back seat. So I had a perfect example here um, where I'm working on the fuel system, and it's an example of where not just budget, but the attention to detail that you have to have in just researching and studying. And it may sound straightforward when I just lay it all out, but there's a lot more to it where you may be online for like 5 hours at a time trying to either find the right part, or luckily, thankfully, people will share things. I've found a lot of great diagrams that, Ford truck people have shared, like how the different eras of this or that on the fuel system are. You can get great vacuum line diagrams and stuff like that. But this was a good example, just, and it's a sliver of the overall work involved, like how many hours this actually will take the average person. But all right, so what you're looking at here is, well, something that obviously needs to be cleaned up and restored again. This did get a bath, but I need to probably run a converter and then repaint it. It's still got enough integrity, though. It was a little scally, but this holds our external high-pressure fuel pump as well as the filter. So the pump from the factory would have sat in this, like that. This is actually, they made a really nice setup here. The only thing with this one is when I pulled one of the rubber washers out, it was a little too corroded. I was going to just like tack weld a new hole on there, maybe even just not worry about the rubber washer. But because we have to upgrade pumps, it wouldn't have necessarily fit in there. So the pump goes here. The front of it obviously routes around to the filter with something like this part that I also have to remake. But the point is, all right, so you find your what size pressure you need for your horsepower. In this case, we've upgraded to a 190. If we were still doing a supercharger, it would have been like a 255 liter per hour. So how the system works from Ford is they have two in tank pumps that originally are just a level of pressure for a carburetor, right? So it uses the regular carb system. And then what they did when they went to EFI is they said, okay, we need more pressure for fuel injection. And they just came up with a simple solution of this mounting bracket, and boom, there you go. And anyone who's built, hot rods or cars knows sometimes it is that simple. Like, you just fab something up for your external pump, right? Like, so I kind of like that they kept that simple. It attaches to the frame with 4 bolts. Really easy to deal with, and even if you had to just do the pump or just do the filter, it's pretty simple to get to. One thing that I've liked doing a truck for is for stuff like that. It's very simple, open, utilitarian. But anyway, so if you find a deal on just your pump alone, like this is a Walbro, they've now become like TI Auto or something, but it's still technically Walbro. Quality is, if you find a deal on a naked pump, then you're gonna need like a bracket kit, right? So this kit came with these 2 brackets. Luckily, I have a lot of leftover bolts from things I've had to resize. I just need a couple nuts. This came with the kind of shock sheath. It's kind of like a beer koozie. And then it came with these 2 nuts, right? But that's only in one kit. The other thing is the stock Bosch pump has a fixed Bundy fitting. This is a 5/16 Bundy fitting. If you're not familiar, that's how you use a quick release, which I'll show you here. These are my 5/16 return lines. So those have like a quick release button, very convenient. Originally, the quick release has that white plastic tab that's a pain in the ass to slide out. So nylon line with something like that, I think, is probably the best, especially for like a street strip build. A lot of times people will be like, oh, I want braided, and it's a cosmetic reason. And a lot of times those braided kits are just PTFE, like rubber inside of a sheath. Nylon has like several other advantages over rubber, where it has lesser evaporative emissions, so the amount of actual emissions coming out of the line, just VOCs from gasoline vapor itself, are lessened. It's longer lasting, it doesn't corrode. The only thing I would say is it's obviously stiffer to work with, so it's like a weird in between, because it's like plastic between a rubber and a steel. I have a whole video on like how to install these on here. Like, you have to heat the line up. But they're superior, and this is what all modern vehicles now use as standard equipment. So even if it's like 500 plus horsepower street car, like, you can still get away with this. It's really, I think the only limit would be like 200 psi of fuel. Like, we're on a 39 psi system, so they're good to go. And I want to say, as far as what the Bundy's holding, like, that's plenty. Like, I don't even think volume is an issue, but if you want AN fittings and braided, whatever, do your own thing. But I think a lot of people go overkill. Anyway, so the point is, that's like an impartial kit you get from Walbro. Then you run into the problem of, you order a Bundy or 2, and again, the Bosch unit has a fixed Bundy, so you have to order 2 for a new one, and they're like an M10. But if you just look up your pump, like, this is a GSL 394 for the 190 in high pressure instead of standard pressure. is you have to have, similar to a brake line, like a brass washer. And of course, I didn't bring it in to show. Kind of like a crush washer on a brake line. And then you may run like Teflon. Um, then, like, let's see. This is the factory harness. So luckily I'm able to reuse this. It plugs into your wiring harness. I think one of the clips broke off, but it should be okay. It's still got one clip. And then it has one of those barbs because it has a spot where it'll just clip to this, which is nice, so it's not loose. But now I have to change these fittings to basically an O style, so strip these wires. Then they can get on there. So that's a separate kit. Luckily, I can reuse these rubber weather boots and stuff like that. So that's a whole thing where you're on Amazon hunting and it's adding up in cost, like to levels that you wouldn't expect. Then I have to remake this piece. I'm going to reuse the factory line from the tank selector valve to the back of the pump. Right, luckily that should be fine and intact. It's a different quick release. I still have to use a plastic lock. But what happened with this one is removing the Bundy. Like you can see maybe that snapped. But what happened is the O-ring came out of these as well as the washer. So this is basically junk, even though it's probably perfectly fine and leak-free. What this is I believe it's actually on like spring tension, and I think it's a nylon inner kind of diaphragm, and then it has like a outer protective rubber layer. So unfortunately, it's not as simple as just changing one of these 90 degrees. And luckily, I do have some extra nylon. This is a 3/8, which means that, you know, the inner diameter is 5/16. So when you're looking at new 90-degree quick releases to come off of this and go to the filter, you have to make sure that the barb is 5/16, as well as the to steel portion of it. So it's a lot of work, and this is just one small section of one thing, right? Like for fuel. The other thing with fuel is you want to be able to, well, not the actual tank vent, but this is ventilation to your charcoal canister off the top of the tank. And then that does feed into the engine. So it's emissions equipment, but it's not a bad idea. And it's not a bad idea to keep those kind of fumes out of the cab. That's why nylon is better. Like you have less VOCs in your vehicle, especially in a van or a camper situation, you know, where you're sleeping above a gas tank. So luckily I'm able to save the factory ones off the original tanks. These are also, actually these are like a 1/4 inch. So the 5/16 outer diameter nylon has to go on these. But these, yeah, like $30-$40 a piece, and there's nothing wrong with these. They just have kind of like a floater, kind of like a lift valve when there's pressure, and then that goes to your charcoal can. So even the smallest thing, like, okay, I have to get this, this, and this, becomes an entire project in itself. Then you have to consider, all right, I'm reusing this bracket. I have to do some physical abrasion, maybe some Seal, and then paint. So that's the whole other part. Maybe it gets an evapo-rust bath. Then you gotta want to look at the integrity, like, oh, is this too thin now? Has it lost too much material? Should I like weld some new sheet metal, at least on the bend, so I don't lose my fuel pump? And sometimes with these, people will just take steel self-starting screws and tap that right into like the frame or something. But I like this setup, so I'm just, luckily I can reuse it. The other thing with this, if you had to replace it, is you can only find that with this and with 155 liter per hour pump, and that's going to be like $150-$200. Like you usually find it for Broncos and stuff. But for our horsepower, that's honestly no good. It's not enough fuel to the engine, more specifically to the rail. So I just wanted to kind of like give one small example of what the whole thing ends up being. And this is just a fuel pump, and you have to go through that process. And the thing is you think, oh, big deal, you have to buy that. But I'm telling you, the first time you order the wrong part or something and feel like an idiot and have to pay like shipping return, and you're talking about a build that has 1,000 different things you've had to buy, like actually 1,000 things, it gets frustrating, and you start to scrutinize. Like you look at like, okay, is this thread the right pitch? Is this actually an M10? Is it a 5/16 or a 3/8 Bundy? And then what's the inner diameter? Because hoses, there's no standard of how people rate hoses. Like vacuum lines and other plumbing, they might be rated at their inner diameter. So instead of people just saying inner diameter, outer diameter, wall thickness, etc., it's always rated. Luckily on Amazon, they've been getting better with like their quick connectors are very specific now. And in parentheses, it'll be like, okay, with a 3/8 nylon, but make sure it's a 5/16 inner diameter. So just setting up my fuel line, and then you have to look at your budget, and then you say, oh, I can't afford to go to my next step. I have to kind of build or work on what I can get to. Very, very lengthy. At the end, will it be worth it to have something that's basically brand new or like new and reliable? Absolutely. But that's kind of, I wanted to do that to kind of give the reality of what happens, because as time has gone on, it's like I'm even kind of in shock of how long something like this can take. And then, you know, people, a lot of people that see this, because it gets shown to a lot of people. I talk to a lot of different people, and there's always kind of the same questions regarding it. And I'm always like, it's a 2,000-hour job. And like I said, it's nothing against anyone in particular. I've probably heard it like 4 times this week. You know what I mean? People who are in the hobby or in the business like get it, but it's so stressful at times, especially in the situation I am in right now. But that's just to give you a realistic idea of how many hours or days could be in one little thing, or even just me talking about it on these videos takes up time. But the cool thing is even little victories like this, where I'm like, all right, my fuel lines are good to go. I still need, like I said, I gotta set up my charcoal lines, but obviously I know the sizes, and then I'll probably need a union because